It is a well-trodden path to a career, but is higher education losing its value? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. University is supposed to set students up for the future, but with high fees, debt and what appears to be a saturated jobs market, just look at how low unemployment is it actually worth it? Should there perhaps be more emphasis on other, more practical ways to learn?
Walking the hallowed halls of university. They're supposed to be some of the best days of your life. But a university degree is not the educational crown it used to be.
At the end of it, you know, you can end up on the dole, so it's very, very disheartening.
Is higher education overrated? Does the chance to expand your mind and opportunities justify the rising costs when there's no job guarantee? For the 5th straight year, more Americans are choosing jobs over a university education. Some experts put it down to the buoyant economy. When in power, Barack and Michelle Obama promoted learning.
We wanted to make higher education cool.
However, cool does not always equal cost-effective, with around 44 million Americans owing over $1.4 trillion in student loans.
I lived in the cheapest apartment on campus that was available. I skipped meals at times. And I got comfortable with the feeling of being hungry.
In the UK, the figure has risen to £100 billion. Despite widespread protest, fees have marched onward and upward. In the last 7 years, they've trebled, with universities charging around £9,000 a year. Debts that may never be repaid. But the promise of a higher wage and personal growth sees many still gathering at the gates.
Because education is a fundamental right for students, and it benefits not only students but wider society as well.
In the last 10 years, there's been a steady increase in UK graduates. Although nearly half of the graduates were working in a non-graduate role, they have a better chance of securing a job, but may need to complete an unpaid internship. In Australia, they're likening it to black market slave labour. Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May has offered some hope to her cash-strapped students. As part of her goal to deliver a socially mobile, fair society, May has promised a review of higher education funding and finance. Education is still seen as the faster pathway out of poverty and into equality. But does it justify paying such huge fees? With more obstacles placed in their way, the decision to attend university is out of their hands. Unless changes are made, the best days of higher education may be resigned to history.
Very pleased to say that joining us via Skype we have Geoffrey de Mowbray, the Chief Exec of Dints International, which is an international trading business. We'll hear more about that in a moment. At the round table, Zamzam Ibrahim, who's the President of the University of Salford Students' Union, also on the National Executive for the National Union of Students. We have Prince Wasim, an entrepreneur and business owner, and Nick Hillman, the Director of the Higher Education Policy Institute. It's going to be fascinating, this, I think, because we're talking not only about the practical side of it, which is financial, etc., and whether you can get a job, but we need to talk about the emotional side, whether it makes you grow up. So, Nick, let me ask you this first of all. What is the point these days of university when there's so much criticism and so much debt and depression?
It's multifaceted. I mean, the first bit is it does help people get professional level jobs. The second bit is it encourages social mobility. It's good for the country as a whole. If we're going to have a high-tech, successful economy in our country, we need highly trained people. It's also lots of benefits that are non-financial. So as well as having higher earnings if you're a graduate, your social outcomes are better too. You have better health. You have better mental health if you've been through university.
But not necessarily while you're there, because the pressures are so great.
So it's a really...
The number of suicides is rising every year.
So there are about 130 suicides a year in British universities. It's an issue that my organisation has written a lot about. It's a key transition point in your life. So for many students, it's the first time they're living away from home. They're learning in new ways. They're making new friends. They're worried about what job they're going to get afterwards. And so we do need to think about the mental health of students. It's not actually any worse than the mental health of people not at university, but we absolutely need to address it.
But these are young, very vulnerable people. Nick,
Yes.
bring you back in just a moment. But Zamzam, you are deeply involved in the educational system. You've got a degree in finance, and yet you don't necessarily believe, as I understand it, that university is the right path for everybody.
So my view on education is that it should be accessible for all, and accessible for all means free education to me. And the way I see universities, the reason universities were set up and they exist is for individuals to be able to think and to be able to debate and to be able to sort of learn and create jobs that don't necessarily exist in the market right now. And universities aren't necessarily doing that, aren't sort of fulfilling their purpose.
Where are they letting people down then?
Letting people down when education is more or less becoming marketised, and therefore everything's being sort of boiled down to exams and sort of memorising a textbook. I don't know when memorising a textbook is ever going to be useful in the workplace.
Well, that's what happened in the A-levels, and then universities were supposed to make you think. And we'll talk about contact hours in just a moment. But let me bring in our two gentlemen who... Well, one went to university, the other didn't go to university, and that's you, Geoffrey. You didn't go. You started up your own business. Why did you decide not to do it? Because you've been successful so far in what you're doing.
I think a number of reasons, really. I think first off, I got a lot of the social experience from being at boarding schools. So, but equally, education and I weren't necessarily well matched, shall we say. I wasn't the most studious individual, and I much preferred learning by doing as opposed to being taught on how to do something.
And how difficult did you find it? Because presumably you come up against a lot of graduates when you didn't have a degree.
I haven't found that, if I'm honest, because I did start my own business. I didn't really have that competition. And arguably, I started my first business when I was around 18 years old, so everyone was still going into university at that point instead of going out and doing business. Also, I chose international trade, which going out there really, that I didn't find much competition at all. So I haven't found it to be a barrier.
Prince, let me bring you in at this point. You had a conviction after you left university. You spent some time at Her Majesty's pleasure, as we say, in jail. Which taught you more, university or prison?
I think I learnt more in prison, to be honest, and not because of the prison system. I've got to put that out there. It's because of I actually took time out to like I said earlier on, self-educate myself. I felt that when I was at uni, there was nothing like pushed to like self-educate in your spare time, get to know yourself, get to know how to do this and actually do things. It was only when I was in prison and I'm in a cell 23 hours of the day by myself that I actually got to know myself better. I actually got to know that actually I like to learn off doing things. So I open up a book and read and actually learn things. Whereas opposed to university, I mean, it was obviously, like you said, you get the social mobility side, you get to see it's very diverse, you meet different people, but I'm more for the apprenticeship side of things.
But let me put this to you. I mean, what you're talking about, sitting in your prison cell reading books, is a form of higher education.
Yep.
So all it really means...
Why do you say that?
Well, because you're teaching yourself. It's higher education.
But I'm teaching myself.
But so you don't have to be taught higher education. You can learn it yourself. Therefore, perhaps what happened was you didn't make the most of your opportunities.
No. When I say teaching myself, I'm reading of people who have done it. So, as opposed to university, when you go to university, you got a lecturer teaching you business that's never done business in his life. Well, I'm reading books when I'm in prison. I'm reading books of Alan Sugar, who's actually done it and implemented it to the highest level possible.
But Nick, isn't what Prince is saying, what is supposed to happen at university, is that you're supposed to self-educate to a large extent?
Absolutely, and I think we need to be a bit careful in this conversation, because when we have a very big diverse university system, sometimes goes wrong for individuals, some of the courses may not be up to scratch. Overall, people are being trained to do real jobs.
So people like lecturers, well, majority of the lecturers, are you telling me, have done what they're teaching?
So university began not just as a way to think. It began originally to train people for the church, then to train lawyers, then to train medics, and it did begin as something vocational.
Yeah, but it did begin, but is it still going
on?
Well,
on some measures, about half of all the courses in the country are professionally accredited for a particular sector in some way. Now, I'm not saying every degree course in the country is fantastic and is brilliant preparation. And obviously, if you do an art subject like I did, history, then, saying has the lecturer had a background in business is a less relevant question. But many of the people running our business
schools... It's not a less relevant question, not at all.
Many of the people running the business schools in the UK absolutely have had a background in business. And many of the people teaching law absolutely have served as practicing lawyers.
Do come in, Zamzam. Yeah.
But then it's unfair to say, because the lecturers are so bounded by the curriculum that they're told to taught by the university, and bounded by this is the particular what you'll be questioned and learned on, and you need to learn specific theories and specific sort of, and that level of restriction is, I suppose, what Prince is talking about in terms of like you don't have the ability to think outside the box. You're not trained to be able to question theories that were invented by X, Y individuals. And yeah, in my institution, I had lecturers that were incredible. That worked in the sector and have done incredible work and then came back into teaching, but they were restricted by the curriculum that the university had told them to teach.
Well, I'm going to bring in Geoffrey one more time and then we can continue the conversation. In fact, everybody can talk to everybody. But Geoffrey, listening to some of this, what are the things that you learned when you were first starting out that you believe you could not have learned if you'd gone to university?
Well, I think, interesting enough, my sister did the business university route and learned a lot of things that I didn't know. I didn't get them off her because I was told at an early age that if I did go to university, it would kill some of my fearlessness about running into deals. I think, look, in hindsight, it's probably been more costly in some respects, the lessons I've learned by doing than going to university. But to give you an example, I would say I couldn't have learned how to negotiate with a wide variety of people in the real world in university, as one example. I couldn't have learned to trust my instincts in the same way. Maybe they do teach that in university, but I don't think I would have got that other than by experiencing failure, success, and things in the real world.
Zamzam, when you were talking to our producer beforehand, you said there is an unwritten culture of shame for those who do not go to university. Yeah. So, Geoffrey, you can come back on this in just a moment, but I'd like you to explain what you meant by that.
I mean, what I mean by that is there's that societal expectation for you to go to school, and then when you finish school, you go on to your A-levels, you complete your A-levels, you get your degree, and once you get your degree, then you get a respectable job. And even when you're certain that route isn't necessarily the route that's going to get you to the track that you want, it's that expectation of like if you're incapable of going to university, then you must be incapable of studying, and it's that.
But
it's
only
that pressure,
what is it? 1 in 3 at the moment in England, and 1 in 4 in Scotland. So 30-something% and 25%. Only that proportion goes to university. You're saying that the vast majority of people walking around with this shame on their shoulders.
No, but it's when I say shame, I'm talking about the expectation, and many young people that go to university and myself being a student president and speaking to students, they're very unsure at the age of 18 what they want to do for the rest of their life. I mean, at the age of 23, I'm still yet to figure out what I want to do for the rest of my life, and I think that expectation posed on 18-year-olds is slightly ridiculous, and that's where the culture of like the expectation of like, okay, all my friends are going to university, I must have to go down the university route. And we need to also look at the realistic of a society when you apply for jobs and apply for professional jobs, you are expected to go to university, you are expected to
You see, I want to broaden this out a little bit. I'm sure got something you'd like to say about that, Nick, but Tony Blair launched this campaign to get 50%, I think it was at one stage, of British students into university. It hasn't got up to that level, but the culture of shame are not going to. Do you agree that it's there?
Well, funnily, you're right that about a third of school leavers go straight to higher education. On Tony Blair's measure, we are now on 49%. So we have basically hit the 59%, because his measure was
so you
people
take mature
up to the age of 30.
Okay.
Up to the age of 30. You know, we only send far fewer people to university than many countries. South Korea sends something like 80% of their people to university. And the reason people want to go to university, and the reason there is that expectation, is because it is, for most students, a fantastic period of their life, number one. And number two, the advantage of going to university over, for example, an apprenticeship, and some apprenticeships are fantastic, but an apprenticeship is designed to train you for a specific job in a specific industry. Now, we're all living much longer, and the economy is changing much faster. And the thing that a university tries to do is deliver transferable skills. And that is why apprentices tend to have good earnings the minute they finish their apprenticeship, but over time, graduate earnings overtake the apprenticeship earnings, because they
We'll talk about debt in just a moment, because about the earnings ratio. But Prince, let me come to you. If you were able to teach somebody something about what you've done after university, in other words, the apprenticeship, if you could take somebody on, and we'll ask Geoffrey the same question, where would you start that you felt that they, what point would you start that you felt they hadn't arrived at by getting a higher education?
So repeat that for me again, sorry.
What would you teach somebody as an apprentice?
So I'll teach them what they would want to be taught. So at first it starts off with yourself. So for me, I knew that I enjoyed business. I knew that I liked doing business. So that's where it first starts.
And your company's called Milkshake, I should say.
Milkshake, make sure you come down.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would teach them what they want to be taught. So it's up to that. First, it's that individual that needs to make that decision. I can't. This is why, she was saying earlier on, I feel like university is just a trophy thing. Like when my family told me to go to university, I come from a very cultural background. I'm Nigerian. So to go university, doesn't matter what you're doing. Okay, if you do doctor, it's just to have that certificate, that you've got.
So without it, you would have been carrying this culture of shame around.
Yes.
You think?
Yeah, well, of course. So for my family, it's like, my son, he's gone to university. Like, that's it. Everything else that I've learned.
Geoffrey, did you ever feel that people were looking at you as though you weren't a proper citizen because you hadn't gone to uni?
Family-wise, I had a lot of challenges. I hadn't gone to uni. That was a big black mark. But I suppose for me, that really gave me a motivator to drive harder and prove that I could succeed more without it. Definitely. So it acted as a catalyst for me moving down my career path. But it was challenging, definitely.
I don't know whether you've taken on any apprentices yet. Maybe you will in the future. What do you think your first lesson to them would be?
We haven't formally taken them on, but we do take a lot of grads who haven't qualified in what we do, and we tend to specifically recruit based on morals, ethics, and things that you can't change in a person. The skills you can change in a person and teach them. So the first thing that we tend to teach everyone is the culture of our business and what we're all about. And quite often people start in one role and end up in something completely different as they go through. We see where their strengths are, and it's not something that you can achieve in a month or two. Typically it takes a year for someone joining us to actually understand where they end up.
Okay, Nick, you wanted to respond to that, but then Zamzam, I'd like to talk to you in a moment about where you think things should change.
I thought it was absolutely fascinating. So the guest you have on, who has not been to university and set up his own business, has just said he recruits grads, and he recruits grads because they fit it well into his business and they can move around and find their place in the business. So it's absolutely fascinating. I'm not sure that is evidence of university going wrong. I think that's evidence of university going right, because we have a small business owner employing and giving well-paid jobs.
Emphasize.
But if anything, he just said that he recruits non-graduates as well as graduates. So they're in the same playing field. They just spent 3 years within university.
But he's willing to pay extra, I guess, for the graduates.
He didn't say that.
Well, graduates.
He didn't say that.
Let's hear what he says.
No, that's not actually true. We don't pay more for grads.
Thank you.
It is just because you have a university degree is not a reason why we would choose you or wouldn't choose you, and it's certainly not a reason to get paid more. Obviously going through an education process for us, there's more about the age and point someone is at in their career. The early 20s age is where people have had a bit more life experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean they need to be grads. And often when we do recruit grads, their degree resembles nothing to do with international trade or business.
And do you find they perhaps feel entitled?
What, the grads?
Yeah.
Sometimes. I think it's a bit of a generalization to say always. There's plenty of non-grads who feel a sense of entitlement as well.
Zamzam, let me ask you, you're deeply involved in the future of education, being on the NUS executive board. Where do you think things should change?
I think in this argument, let's bring it back to the fact that I do believe higher education is incredibly important. I do think the experiences, the skills that I've learned in
where's
higher
it wrong
education
at the moment?
has been great. But I think where it's wrong is education isn't accessible, and education doesn't allow you to develop as an individual within particular fields. I think it's very restricted right now, and it's all down to the fees with it.
Should be more tailored. Well, look, it's never going to be free again.
Why not? If education should be accessible, then it should be free.
But because we can't afford it as a country.
That's not necessarily true. I think the idea of the deficit model isn't necessarily true.
Nick, can we afford it?
I think education is an investment.
We could make that decision. We could spend much less on the NHS, much less on schools, much less on unemployment benefits,
this is
spend
the
all
thing
the money on
we
universities.
always take it back to the NHS, and it's that threatening with the society in terms of like, we'll take money away from the NHS. The government spends a lot of money on other things. It's not just the NHS and schools that we spend money on. Schools and NHS are an incredible thing.
Government spend a lot of money
that
in
we
prisons.
should be spending more on.
Okay, but why should people have a free education? Why shouldn't they pay for something that might benefit them in the future?
When you go to university, you shouldn't be restricted by the cost, because logically speaking, I went to university when it went up to $9,000. It was the first year went up to $9,000, and I had and you sit down and you have the debate. If I'm gonna be in this much debt, what career lines can I go down to be able to get to be able to earn X amount? And that's how you think about it. When actually, university should be, what do I enjoy? Where do I want to make a difference? Where do I see myself in the future?
What about you and debt? Because there you were, you were a university graduate. Presumably you had to borrow some money to do so. Then you started up your own business. Are you having to pay it?
Yeah, of course. But like I said, I was speaking to, I think, someone before I come on set, and I was saying that university, you go straight into debt, but they were like, oh, but you don't have to pay it back unless you get a good job. But our country's run on credit. So immediately you come out of university, you're trying to apply for certain credit cards just to get by. You can't get the credit card because your credit scoring's 0 now. So either way, it's a lose-lose situation.
You see, this is a conundrum, isn't it? Because you say that there's an added value in having a degree, that you earn more money, but you also say, Nick, that very few people, or few are going to have to pay back these debts, which means they're not earning very much money. So what was the point in getting the degree in the first place?
Few people have to pay back the entirety of their debt.
So what was the point in getting the degree in the first place?
Because most people will pay back a large portion of their debt, even though most students will have a bit of the debt written off at the far end. But I'm hearing a model of higher education where somebody else pays for us to go and have a good time for 3 years. That just is not how the world works. And if that did happen, it would just be somebody else's debt. The government borrows far more money than it spends every year. So if the government's to cover all the costs and not the students, the government would have to borrow even more debt. And who's going to have to pay that back in the future? Well, it's all taxpayers.
So what do you think the most important change could be?
No, I think the most important change is something that has already happened just after the fees came in. And at the time, the government said, because we now have higher fees, we'll let universities, for the first time in living memory, recruit as many students as they want. And that is the single most important thing they've done in terms of getting more people from underrepresented groups to university. Because no longer do the universities have to say, shall I take that middle-class kid? Shall I take that working-class kid from a tougher background? Now they take them both. And some of our biggest universities are growing quite fast.
But doesn't that also devalue a degree?
There's no evidence in the data for that yet. The earnings premium from having a degree is very substantial, not far off £250,000 over your lifetime.
It also depends who you read on that.
Yeah, and of course I'm talking an average as well, and it doesn't work out for everybody. There are some courses that deliver much less good outcomes. Let's publish that data. Let's have that debate whether there's some courses that don't deliver the really top-notch outcomes.
We're going to have to wind this up in just a moment. I would like you to give a little bit of advice, and Geoffrey, include you in this, to somebody who's in A-levels, or maybe just doing GCSEs and thinking about what to do next, what would you say to them?
I would tell them to choose something that they're passionate about, something that they love, something that they enjoy, and make the best out of higher education if you decide to go.
Same thing, I'd say make sure, like I said earlier on, make sure you're choosing what it is that you want to do, but you can only learn from people who've already done it. So find yourself an apprenticeship. That's what I'd say.
Okay, and apprenticeships at the moment are proving rather difficult for people to take up. There was a massive uptake when the government launched a big scheme last year, but now the numbers diving.
That's where the change needs to come. There needs to be much more apprenticeships than there is already.
I mean, apprenticeship needs to be better paid, and they're currently exploited. I don't feel like apprenticeship is something that you should push students down.
Well, this is funny because as we wind up the programme, I'm going to tell you a little story. But Geoffrey, what do you say? What would you say to somebody who was in your position at whatever school you were at, and they're wondering what to do now?
I'd say if you don't know what you want to do, don't go to university for the sake of it. I would go out and explore a little bit more about what you want to do, whether that's work experience, apprenticeships, travelling, whatever it may be. If you want to be a doctor, I'd go to university, because I'm not going to trust a doctor who hasn't been through the university system.
Geoffrey, thank you. We're going to have to stop it there. And you talked about slave labour. Let me tell you a little story. I did not go to university. I did an apprenticeship. They called it indentures at the time. And I was offered a wage of £10.50 a week. It didn't seem too bad, so I'll let you work out how long ago that was. You can tell me later. From me, David Foster, and the rest of the Roundtable team, including my guests here, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for watching the programme. See you next time. Bye-bye.